Welcome to the Heavy Spoilers Show. I'm your host Paul, and this video we're breaking down Kill Bill. Originally intended to be two films, I thought we'd put our two breakdowns together. This will contain all the Easter eggs, making of trivia, and things you might not know about both movies. So come with us as we break it all down and go for a ride with the bride. The movie's a masterpiece, and after rewatching it, I think it's Tarantino's best. Throughout the film, we follow the bride and watch as she plays this dangerous game of death. Filled with a wealth of Easter eggs, there's also major nods to films like Game of Death. That's the tracksuit I'm wearing right now, with it inspiring the bride's iconic costume later. Beyond that though, there's a wealth of references and a ton of callbacks to Tarantino's work. The film itself was even set up in Pulp Fiction, and it's possible this is all just a TV pilot from that universe.
It was a show about a team of female secret agents called Fox Force 5. Fox as in we're a bunch of foxy chicks. Force as in we're a force to be reckoned with. And 5 as in there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of us. There was a blonde one, Somerset O'Neill. She was the leader. The Japanese fox was a kung fu master. The black girl was a demolition expert. French fox's specialty was sex.
What was your specialty?
Knives.
The movie was actually conceived back in 1994 when Tarantino and Uma Thurman were working on that film. They brainstormed the idea between takes and outlined the structure of the story. The pair then teamed up in 2000 to bring their little idea to life. Thurman actually came up with the opening scene where we see the bloodied beaten bride battered in her wedding dress. Due to this, the story's credited a Q and U for Quentin and Uma. Since 94, Thurman had gone through a big life-changing event and she gave birth to her daughter Maya in 1998. Maya is obviously a big name herself now, with her blowing up due to Stranger Things. However, her birth changed the original outline and took things in a slightly different direction. We'll talk more about that when we get to Volume 2, but it helped to shape the story later on. I will be talking spoilers for Volume 2 and how stuff pays off there, so if you haven't seen it yet, apologies, but it's difficult to really explain how good some of the breadcrumbs are if we don't at least acknowledge their eventual payoff. The story was written to reflect a more mature Thurman, and production was even delayed due to her giving birth. But Fox Force 5 was the original idea, and they picked up lots of threads left dangling in Pulp Fiction. Maya Wallace says how her character was the deadliest person with a knife, and we watched that play out in the movies. Even the list the bride crosses out says Death List 5. A Japanese actress was originally going to play O-Ren, but Tarantino was so impressed with Lucy Liu in Shanghai Noon that he changed the character. I think it was a great decision too. Her lineage adds a lot more depth to her character and makes her board meeting scene much more impactful. Part 1 and 2 were also shot back to back, with the first being released in 2003. The second was dropped just 6 months later, with lots of studios adopting this model at the time. The Lord of the Rings trilogy was all shot together, along with the second and third Matrix as well. It was a great time to be a fan of films, and there was always that sense of eagerness upon leaving the cinema. I think the MCU really capitalized off that feeling with Infinity War and Endgame, and yeah, the shorter space between it just maintains the hype. However, the movies were originally supposed to be a single film, but the runtime was deemed too long. Thus Tarantino cut them in half, but it's probably better than cutting things out just to fit one movie. Tarantino's films, they've also gotten longer and longer as he's been given more creative control. To me, he's up there with the likes of Nolan and Scorsese, where his name just brings hype to a film. Since then, he's done The Hateful Eight, Django Unchained, and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, with them all getting close to or pushing beyond 3 hours. Grindhouse was also pushed as a double feature as well, so doing long films isn't out of his wheelhouse. What I love about Kill Bill though is that it says as much about the story as it does the director. The movie is a pastiche of every single influence Tarantino's experienced throughout the years. It feels like a combination of countless kung fu, western and blaxploitation flicks, with it referencing things he's absorbed over the years. They even mix in anime segments, and we get several references that all go into this melting pot. Now, similar to Pulp Fiction, the movie has a non-linear structure. Opening on the Shaw Brothers logo, this was the largest film company in Hong Kong for over 85 years. Founded by the Shaw Brothers, its symbols obviously a play on something that they didn't Warner Brother they took. From here though, we cut to our feature presentation banner, and these things instantly show Tarantino's taking us through his influences. It also backs up the point of the original plan. In the 60s and 70s, drive-thrus and theaters would often roll double features. They'd show the B-movie to help support the main one and give customers a bit more bang for their buck. B-movies were cheap to make and easy to roll out with big releases, so they were commonplace to help prop up the main movie. However, as people started buying televisions en masse, the focus at the studios shifted to producing shows. So the budgets were placed to that instead of these films, and thus the model died out. But with Kill Bill being volume 1 and 2, this would initially be used to call back to that. Over the top, we can also hear funky fanfare by Keith Mansfield. It can also be heard in his later movie Once Upon a Time in Hollywood when Cliff drives to the drive-in theater, and it was also used in Grindhouse. This was rolled out with a feature presentation banner, so it's likely something Tarantino had fond memories of. After this, we then open with the phrase, "Revenge is a dish best served cold." This was first said in English in the translation of Eugene Sue's 1846 novel Memoirs of Matilda. Here though, it's attributed to being an old Klingon proverb, which is a reference to the Wrath of Khan.
Kirk, my old friend, do you know the Klingon proverb that tells us revenge is a dish that is best served cold?
Star Trek is referenced later on in the film when Sophia Fatale is introduced looking like a Star Trek villain.
Who's dressed like she's a villain on Star Trek.
Now when we meet the bride, she's not in the best state and we see our hero at her lowest point. I know these days there's a lot of talk about the female girl boss and how these characters are often infallible. So it's nice seeing that women can be seen as vulnerable and actually go on an arc that builds them as a character. Meeting the titular Bill, I love how Tarantino has his name on his hanky to tell us instead of just having the characters say it. Having him affectionately wipe her while also being the one who put her in this position, it's a great way to show his violent, caring nature. David Carradine casts a long shadow, and it's difficult to imagine Bill as anyone else. The martial arts legend had cemented his name in several projects over the years, including the show Kung Fu. There he played Kwai Chang Caine, a Chinese-American Shaolin master who traveled the American West. It blended Western and Eastern influences, just like this movie does. So the casting makes a lot of sense. However, Jack Nicholson, Kurt Russell, Mickey Rourke, Kevin Costner, and Burt Reynolds were all considered for the part. Warren Beatty was also really close to appearing in the final cut. In the end, he left due to creative differences, and they have kept quiet about exactly what this entailed. I do think Carradine fits it best though, and it's arguably the role he'll be remembered for. Tarantino wanted to bring different martial arts influences from around the world, and this is seen in the castings. Chai Hulu represented China, and Sonny Chiba was for Japan. Tarantino also said if Bruce Lee was still alive, he'd of course have been asked to star in the movie. He would of course appear in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and it's clear the director has a lot of love for the actor. Now we also get our first major Western reference here. The gun being pointed to her is based on The Good, the Bad and the Ugly, where the man with no name has the same thing happen. Similar to the man with no name, the bride's real name's also kept from the viewer. However, in part 2, we do learn her full name's Beatrix Kiddo. Bill here though, he refers to the bride as Kiddo, which does recontextualize things after seeing part 2.
No, kiddo.
Beatrix Kiddo.
Here.
Initially, you're just supposed to see it as a pet name, but I love how it changes this moment on a rewatch. Knowing this also makes a line Oren says later on have much more meaning.
Silly rabbit. Tricks are for kids.
That was the tagline of Trix cereal, so initially it's just seen as a reference to that. However, Trix forms part of Beatrix, and the surname Kiddo could be shortened to Kid. So Trix are for kids. Now because of this, you can assume Oren used to say this when they worked together.
Tricks are for kids, silly rabbit.
Now though we discover her name in part 2, there's actually a moment where you see it in this film. In a blink and you'll miss it shot, her name can be spotted on her plane ticket. Another great detail was spotted by Reddit user Dr. Aneurysm. In volume 1, if you turn the subtitles on, you may see Bill says kiddo and there's a lowercase k. However, in volume 2 when he says it, this becomes capitalized to denote it's her name. Now, we learn she's been attacked by her former colleagues and boss for the crime of running away. We discover that she's pregnant with Bill's child, which she mentions just before being shot by him. It's presumed that the baby didn't survive, but we learn in part 2 that she was taken by her father. The child has been named BB, which might be combining Beatrix and Bill. Beatrix explains in part 2 that she couldn't be an assassin, as being a mother was much more important. She wanted to leave Bill so her daughter wouldn't be turned into a killer and would at least have a chance at a normal life. This is mirrored in Vanita Green, who he learns had a daughter as well. Now Bill never intended to actually kill Beatrix in this opening scene. He presumed she had been killed and he wanted to enact revenge, only to discover she was getting married and was pregnant. That then takes us into theory time, theory time, theory time. Okay, so considering how Bill's an expert killer, I do wonder if after hearing the baby was his, that he shot her in a way where he knew she wouldn't die. She'd need to be alive to deliver the baby, and thus he may have just put her in a coma. Thus he could have extracted the child later on, so I think the coma was on purpose. This is backed up later in the hospital scene with Buck. He says that her plumbing doesn't work anymore, so it could have been a side effect of taking the child. This is also backed up by what happens with Al Driver. He calls her off from poisoning Beatrix in her sleep, and this would of course have been fatal. So he likely knew his shot wouldn't have killed her, but that's just a theory time. And their videos are still as cringe as they've always been.
More, give me more.
Now from here we cut to the opening credits with Bang Bang, My Baby Shot Me Down by Nancy Sinatra. This was originally written by Sonny Bono and sung by Cher before blowing up when it was then sung by Nancy. Obviously it's a very on the nose summary of what we've seen thus far with Bill shooting her down. However, this pays off in a big way when Beatrix finally meets her daughter. She says bang bang and pretends to shoot her, which brings this all full circle. Each of the Deadly Viper assassination squads then listed with Lucy Liu as ORN first. Vivica Fox is then named next with these two characters dying in Volume 1. We also have Michael Madsen as Bud, with this being the second big role he had with Tarantino. Madsen played a big part in Reservoir Dogs, and both can be seen as the pair's big break. In flashbacks, Bud also looks similar to Madsen's character, and it's a further homage to that. We then see Daryl Hannah as Al Driver. Now the name may possibly come from a production company owned by Tarantino himself. That was named Capital L Driver, and they produced the Full Tilt Boogie documentary, which was about making From Dusk Till Dawn. Tarantino wrote and starred in that movie, and thus it's a nice little Easter egg. Then lastly, we have Bill, running the Deadly International Viper Assassination Squad. This neatly shortens to the acronym DIVA. Due to them all being named after snakes, it's even possible Tarantino is giving a nod to the Serpent Society. We then see the bride lying down in black and white. This is a reference to the opening of Citizen Kane, where we see Charles Foster Kane's corpse. The credits then end, listing this as Chapter 1 as a 2 circled. This is playing off Benita Green being number 2 in the credits, and she of course also appears as the second on Kiddo's list. When we see the list after the killing, we can see she's already been crossed off, meaning that the final fight took place before this first chapter. So this means that the order they appear in the credits foreshadows the order that they're killed in. The bride then arrives at Benita Green's house, and we hear an ice cream van jingle in the back. Now in the original script, Go-Go was actually 2 characters. These were Yuki and Go-Go, with the former seeking revenge. Yuki's the girl with a mask from the Crazy 88, but they ended up removing her as a fully fledged character. She obviously dies in the fight, but in the original plans, she was going to survive it. It was then going to be revealed that Yuki was in the ice cream van, slowly stalking the bride. That doesn't make it to the film, but I would have loved to have seen that appearing throughout. The house itself's also green, with a nice green lawn, and that nice green little turtle sandbox that every kid should have. My kids have got it and they get sand in the house all the time now. I start staring and going... Anyway, Vanita's last name's Green as well, so there you go, mate. Greatest film analysis channel on YouTube. She's now going by the name Jeannie Bell though, which is a homage to former Playmate and movie star Jean Bell. According to IMDb Trivia, the paintings on the wall were also provided by Rodney Greer. As you might have guessed, he's the brother of Pam Grier, who starred in Tarantino's Jackie Brown. One of the paintings also looks like a blood splatter, and it's a nice way to highlight Green's violent side hidden amongst his normal life. Answering the door, Green says,
"Sarah, I cannot believe you are early."
Obviously her daughter turns up later in the scene, so it's nice that they foreshadow that bit by having her expected to be her. It's here that we get one of the most memorable parts of the movie with that piercing siren playing. This has become such an iconic part of the movie, and every time Screen Crush posts a breakdown, I start to think about this. Overlaid, we can also see moments from the wedding attack, and also that the bride's clearly pregnant, which is a nice touch you might miss. Now, this song's actually the Ironside theme tune written by Quincy Jones. It also featured in Five Fingers of Death, where it was used when the protagonist would enact their revenge. So it plays really well into the themes of this movie. Much of the music in the films actually also sourced from soundtracks from other films, with Tarantino using his own collection. The close-up to the eyes is also a reference to the movie Death Rides a Horse. That also was the basis of the shot we see at the 35-minute mark where the characters all look down on the bride. There we also have 3 women and 1 man though. That reminded me a lot of Charlie's Angel with Bud being Bosley. Their outfits look a lot like the Doll Squad, which also inspired the classic TV show. Lucy Liu was of course a big part of the 2000s Charlie's Angels and also its sequel. So it's nice that they all kind of tied together, and this shot similar to Tarantino's trademark trunk shot in Pulp Fiction. The trunk shot's also used again at the end when Sophie's in the back of the car. So it just brings together all these moments and makes for a really great scene. During the fight we also see Beatrix wearing Onitsuka Tiger shoes. These are the same brand that Bruce Lee wore during Game of Death, which complements the use of his iconic yellow outfit. This is paid tribute to during the fight at the House of the Blue Leaves when Beatrix turns up in the same outfit. Later on, the Crazy 88 also wear Kato masks, with this being what Lee's character wore in the Green Hornet. Anyway, Venita's daughter arrives and interrupts the fight, and it works to emphasize the reason for Beatrix's rip-roaring rampage of revenge. She shows empathy and pauses though, and it highlights how she thinks kids should be shielded from this world. It's also fairly similar to the flashback scene in part 2. There she shows mercy to an assassin after she says she's pregnant. Now I love how this whole thing's basically like Harry Potter, except we have assassins instead of wizards. Very John Wick, and yeah, lots of things going on behind the scenes that you might not know about. Why is my next door neighbour having a fight in the front garden with a samurai sword? Why? Tarantino has mentioned several times though that Nikki could also form the basis of a Kill Bill Part 3. That they could have the bride, and hell, maybe even Bibi played by Maya Hawke. I'd love to see them living a life of peace, only for Nikki to show up and come for revenge. In my opinion, Tarantino's movies have only gotten better as time's gone on, and yeah, just give the fans what they want. It's right there. The overhead shot is also very subtle, and it's done to show the divide between the 2 former friends. Beatrix explains how she could even kill her husband in order to get revenge, and as she says,
That would be even, Vernita. That'd be about square.
this is a callback to Maya Wallace in Pulp Fiction where she said the same thing. Wait a minute, that's a rectangle, Tarantino. You hack! We also see that Venita is still salty about not being called Black Mamba for, well, obvious reasons. This is possibly a reference to Mr. Pink though, who wanted a different name during the naming scene in Reservoir Dogs. Now we discover that Venita is actually living the life Beatrix wanted to have. She left, got married, and had a child, and I always felt like the scene kind of paints out the bride as the villain. Obviously her reasons are valid, but a part of me, it does want her to forgive her. When they organise the fight on the night, Venita even talks about doing it where she manages Little League Baseball.
There's a baseball diamond where I coach our little league about a mile from here.
So it's clear she's moved on, but the vengeful side of the bride now comes for her. I love how Beatrix says, getting knocked up won't stop what's coming, and yeah, this whole scene's perfect. There's no elaborate end to the fight either, like there is later on. Benita's killed, trying to take her out with a gun that's hidden in a box of cereal called Kaboom. Subtle mate, Kaboom, subtle. However, this might be Tarantino referencing The Simpsons, as there they made fun of him by saying,
What I'm trying to say in this cartoon is that violence is everywhere in our society, you know? It's like even in breakfast cereals, man.
Telling Nikki she'll be waiting if she wants to get revenge. This is also a reference to The Punisher from '89. There, Frank Castle said to Tommy Franco he'd be waiting after he killed his father.
I'm gonna kill you.
I'll be waiting.
The bride then leaves and gets in the pussy wagon that she stole from Buck. Tarantino actually drove the truck around in real life, but had to stop doing it because it was obvious it was him. Has featured in several music videos though, with it also appearing in Missy Elliott's I'm Really Hot and Lady Gaga and Beyonce's song Telephone. The name may have been lifted from Grease's Grease Lightning, where the lyrics say, You know that I am bragging, she's a real pussy wagon, Grease Lightning. We then see the license plate says Psy Wagon, and this allowed it to be shown on network television. There the sign was redubbed and altered to the Party Wagon, but hey, they said it in Grease, mate, it's fine. Sonny Chiba, who plays Hattori Hanzo's voice, can also be heard as Venita's names crossed out. You can also spot the ice cream van moving down the street playing the jingle. Again, this was gonna be a big surprise down the line, and it's one of those elements I really wish they retained. Hitting chapter 2, we then flash back to 4 years and 3 months earlier. This subtly implies that the bride was only 3 months pregnant at the time of the massacre. Obviously, a baby born then would be greatly premature, so they'd need the coma to help it develop. Over the top, we can also hear a certain female by Charlie Feathers as the Texas Ranger arrives. You may be wondering why why he has so many sunglasses on his dashboard, but this is a little Easter egg. In the opening of the original Gone in 60 Seconds, we had a similar shot with lots on the dashboard. The ranger arriving and talking to the deputy also reminded me of the scene with Dennis Hopper in Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. This is Michael Parks, who's playing the role of Earl McGraw. Parks played the same character in From Dusk Till Dawn, and he was killed by the two leads at the start. His son James Parks is his deputy, and he also played the same role in From Dusk Till Dawn 2.
9 dead bodies.
Later on, the bride says that they really should have killed 10, with that extra number being due to her baby. After spitting up her blood, we then cut to the bride in hospital as Elle Driver makes her entrance. Here we catch her whistling a theme which comes from the movie Twisted Nerve. Split screen part is really cool, as again, it shows a divide between the two characters like we had with Green. Tarantino said he was inspired by the works of Brian De Palma, who has been known for his split screen shots. This was most notably in Carrie, but he also did it in Dressed to Kill. I feel like that's what Quentin's referencing, as it also has a nurse who kills. The bride's name is also beeped throughout the film.
Hi, honey. I'm Mr. Steve.
This is likely a reference to De Palma's film Greetings, in which a similar thing happens. Now, according to IMDb trivia, the view from the trees through the window was taken from the 1990 film ID, which I haven't checked and I don't know where it is, but apparently that's what it says in the trivia. Originally in the script though, we were going to learn that Bill was a master chemist and he concocted this deadly cocktail. Titled Goodbye Forever, other syringes would have other purposes. The bride would use the undisputed truth to get the info from Sophie, and Bill would then use it on Beatrix in Volume 2. So it brings it all together really nicely, but they ended up cutting it, which you can kind of understand. Elle is a blonde bombshell just like Beatrix, but because of this, it's built a jealous rage in her. Elle is unable to outdo Beatrix no matter how hard she tries. She's even the new lover of Bill, but clearly Bill's just trying to replace Beatrix with the next best thing. He clearly still has feelings as well, as he calls off the hit and won't let Driver do it. Now we know Elle failed to live up to her, and we discover that she also went to Pai Mei. However, he took Elle's eye, which is a great little detail that we learn in part 2. Now the character also builds nicely off Vanita. Whereas Vanita went on to have the life she wanted, Elle's now taken the life that she had. The poisoning with the syringe is straight out of the movie Black Sunday, and her codename's California Mountain Snake. While that snake's not venomous, it is actually deadly to other snakes as it's resistant to venom. The bride's codename was the Black Mamba, with the Black Mamba also being a snake. So we have the Californian mountain snake trying to take out another snake, which is a great way to play into their names. Bill also discusses how she deserves her chance for revenge, which plays into the sort of rules the assassins have. This is also something the bride displayed with Nikki, and I love how there's this honor amongst thieves. We then see as Beatrix wakes up after a mosquito takes her blood. The way she jolts up suddenly could also be a reference to Pulp Fiction. There her character wakes up after an overdose. I did wonder if the mosquito sticking to her was supposed to be a reference to the needle that woke her up there. It's a harrowingly emotional scene as she then realizes her child's gone. Looking at her hands, she then discovers it's been 4 years. Now how she does this was going to be explored in a scene in which she traveled around the world. Beatrix studied palmistry, which allows her to read her palms. Part of these teachings is to denote the passage of time, and that's how she can do it. It also shows Tarantino's got a hand fetish as well as a foot one. You might also notice that her heart rate's really fast, but when she hears Buck, this then starts to lower. It shows she can regulate her heartbeat and is a great bit of character that highlights her skills. Now we learn that Buck's a nurse who's basically pimping her out while she lies there comatose. We see the hypocrisy exemplified in the character's cross, which he wears while carrying out these horrendous acts. You might also notice the sunglasses that Beatrix is gonna steal. These Elvis glasses are the ones Christian Slater wore in True Romance, which was written by Tarantino. If you're an Adam Sandler fan, you might also recognize Buck's client, who's played by Jonathan Loughran. He was in a lot of Sandler's earlier movies, and that laugh's just etched into my brain. The Vaseline tub close-up we get as well. Phew, dear me. Smashing Buck's head like the like button, we then hear his catchphrase.
My name is Buck, and I'm here to
This might have been a reference to the movie Eaten Alive, where Robert Englund says, "I'm Buck and I'm raring to
Name's Buck. I'm raring to
We then get the absolute most well-known trademark from Tarantino as the bride tries to wiggle her big toe. Focusing on her feet, you can imagine the director behind the chair just just drooling away there. Does it in Pulp Fiction, to Death Proof, to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and yeah, Tarantino has become infamous for his focus on feet. According to IMDb Trivia, this is also a reference to the Alfred Hitchcock Presents episode Breakdown, which had a car crash survivor trying to signal he was alive. As this is going on, we get a good look at the past and are introduced to O-Ren. This shot is taken right out of Lady Snowblood, and it's such a cool moment. We then get the incredible anime style scene that tells us the story of the character. It was made by Production IG, who also worked on the seminal Ghost in the Shell. At this time, anime was becoming huge in the West. Spirited Away had won Best Animated Picture at the 2002 Oscars, and it was really getting attention. MTV has done a great breakdown of the Studio Ghibli classic, and if you want to check it out, yeah, go in the link below. The Animatrix had also come out the same year as this movie. Kids were being shown things like Sailor Moon and Dragon Ball Z, and Cartoon Network was pushing a lot of things on Toonami. So Tarantino really had his finger on the pulse, and it shows how much he was invested in the culture to be pushing it in this film. We then see her parents killed by assassins, and Carradine confirmed one of them was a young Bill. This was theorized for a while due to the rings the characters had, and then the actor confirmed it. The clue was that they were just like the one Bill had when he spoke to Elle on the phone. We then see O-Ren kill the boss who was involved in the family's death.
I'm getting the word nonce.
Getting her revenge at 11, she pretty much follows the path of the bride. Bill being involved in the death of her family also makes her very akin to Beatrix. However, she goes after the boss and just ends up working for Bill instead of taking him down. The idea of taking out nonces is also mirrored in Gaga, who kills the man flirting with her later. The guy's a complete creep and does it even though she's wearing a school uniform. She stabs him in the crotch, which is also something her character does in Battle Royale. Now we see O-Ren at the age of 20 in a full bodysuit with cropped hair. Again, you can clearly see the Ghost in the Shell references, and it's such a creative scene. After this moment, the bride then says,
But on that day, 4 years ago, she made one big mistake. She should have killed 10.
This again is a reference to Death Rides a Horse, with a line being,
The bandits who killed 5 defenseless people made one big mistake. They should have killed 6.
We then see 13 hours later and catch the bride getting out the wagon. There's a pull behind the back wheel, and this is just under where she was sitting. Now, according to the trivia, this is actually a puddle of urine due to her sitting there for 13 hours. The bride then departs Okinawa, and the plane map's reminiscent of the one used in Indiana Jones. The plane scene with the orange sky and shot of the pilots is also an homage to the opening of Gokei Body Snatcher from Hell. The plane also shows air with an arrow to an O, which is the bride taking the air to O red, which is probably a reach, but we're being thorough. One thing I love though is that the planes also have holders for the passengers' katanas. You can see that in better detail on the way back and can catch one in the seat beside her. We then meet Hattori Hanzo, played by legendary Japanese actor Sonny Chiba. Hanzo is named after the real-life legendary samurai, and it shows how well Tarantino knew the culture. Now, Chiba has played Hanzo before, and this was in the TV show Shadow Warriors. Tarantino stated that this is what inspired the name, and thinks of this movie's Hanzo as a descendant of the one from the show. His daughter Juri also appears in the movie later on and plays a crazy 88 member who's killed in the sword fight. We learn Hanzo took an oath to never make another sword due to his student Bill. Bill became a relentless killer for hire, and thus I think this weighed on Hanzo's conscience. It's possible this may even be a nod to the Winchester house, in which its occupants thought it was haunted. The Winchesters believed they were haunted by the ghosts of everyone who'd ever died due to their weapons. Thus they kept building extensions, and it made it like a labyrinth with some passages that went absolutely nowhere. Oppenheimer of course showcased regret over building the atomic bomb, and I feel like these aspects were the basis for Hanzo. We have a Japanese man who made a weapon that killed countless people, and he gave this to an American. So I might be reaching with that, and it might be a flip, but it's clear that there's still a lot of remorse in the character. Part 2 implies that Bill trained under Hanzo just as he did with Pai Mei, so it's clear the pair knew each other well. Hanzo's blades are said to be the sharpest ever made, and they look sharper than me in a James Bond breakdown. This edge can be seen as the bride later slices the baseball in half effortlessly. This was actually done for real on set by Zoe Bell, who worked as the stunt double of Uma Thurman. In what's a nice little gift, they actually gave her the Bell mailbox from the start after the scene wrapped. They didn't intend for her to have it at the start, but after realizing her surname was Bell, it made sense to just give it as a nice little gift, which she then said she'd give her parents, and I want to find out where they live because I need to take a selfie beside that mailbox. I also love how the bride pretends she can't speak Japanese. She does kind of give it away though, as when Hanzo and his staff are arguing, she has to bite her lip due to laughing. So it shows she can understand them, but is just playing dumb to get Hanzo on her side. Shout out to Reddit user Tran77A who pointed out the dialect change as well. Apparently Hanzo starts off with the typical dialect you'd get from an Okinawan, but this alters to the traditional Japanese after Beatrix drops his name. I love how the bride goes through his collection, and it's shot almost like just going to a regular store and seeing an item you really like. Although Hanzo supplies a sword, it's clear it's just so he can take out his previous student. I'm not theory timer, but again, it backs up the prior point. The sword being handed over is almost like a religious ceremony, and it's clear the honor that comes from getting a Hanzo sword. So like buying a Heavy Spoilers t-shirt, and did you know, we have lots of them on the store below. Whether it's our Disney shill one, if you're gonna spoil the movie Warner Brother, our Alien Chestburster, Sith Happens, or even a Theory Time, it's all there, and you'll look fantastic, all while supporting videos just like this, which we love you for. Cutting to chapter 5, we then learn Bill propped up Oren amongst the other gangs. It's here that we meet Sophie Fatale, and also Gogo. Sophie was actually present at the massacre at El Paso, and we hear her answer the phone with a ringtone of Auld Lang Syne. In Japan, this is known as Hataru no Hikari, or Glow of the Firefly, which I've definitely butchered. Auld Lang Syne though, it's about how old acquaintances shouldn't be forgotten, and it's obviously ironic as it's used in the scene where they beat up the bride. Gogo is also played by Chiaki Kiruyama, who appeared in Ju-on the Curse. It's a fantastic film, and I've wanted to break it down for a while because I did a big J-horror binge when I broke down The Ring. Dark Waters is another classic as well, and Tarantino said he really got into the Grudge universe when those movies released. Now, as mentioned before, she was also part of Battle Royale, which Tarantino named as his favourite film. So her casting here makes a lot of sense. Now, Gogo Yubari is in fact two references, with Gogo being the name of the character from Speed Racer. Yubari, on the other hand, that was where Tarantino first went to in Japan to showcase his film Reservoir Dogs. We then see how insecure Oren is about her heritage and not being fully Japanese, which comes with the very salty boss Tanaka. Portrayed by Jun Kunimura, he was cast after Tarantino saw Minichi the Killer. After this, no one speaks about her American heritage as they're all afraid of what could happen. One thing you might also notice about Oren's sword is that the handle also doesn't have a guard. These are in place to protect you during a fight so people can't run the blade down and slice off your hand. However, as we've seen so far, all of Oren's victims have been struck down with one hit, so there's no need for her to have this. Oren then decides to head off, and we see as a fountain of blood spews out Tanaka's wound. This was a trope in Japanese samurai movies that's become a staple over the years. Starting with Kurosawa's classic Sanjuro, it's continued in things like Lady Snowblood, which this movie's heavily inspired by. In an interview with Robert Rodriguez, Tarantino said they made the blood effects the old school way by using Chinese condoms filled with fake blood. The actors would then hold them and they'd pop them as they were killed. Over 450 gallons of fake blood were used for the film, which led to the crazy 88 fight scene being in black and white. For the US release at least. However, if you track down a Japanese version of the film, you'll see the whole scene's in colour. Now, we then see that Oren speaks just English, with this being translated by Fatale. Her name's an on-the-nose reference to the femme fatale archetype, because yeah, this is all basically a TV pilot. I love the way Lou delivers his speech though, and it's kind of like customer service at the start until it just goes absolutely insane. As she holds up Tanaka's head, another great detail can be spotted with the model's eyes. These are looking up instead of forward because they would have been looking up at her on the table. We then see Beatrix arrive in Japan with a really obvious model of Tokyo as the plane descends. These models were actually leftovers from the recent Godzilla films, with them also using stuff from King Ghidorah, Giant Monsters All-Out Attack. As the plane lands, we can see an energy drink billboard that has Gogo on it. To the right of this is also a billboard for Red Apple cigarettes. Now, these Red Apple cigarettes are a fictional brand that Tarantino created, and they've appeared in Pulp Fiction, From Dusk Till Dawn, The Hateful Eight, and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. We get a much better look at the ad for this at the airport, and we see as the bride walks past it. Again, Sophie Fatale's on it, and it highlights how the gangs have infiltrated everything. In the advert, she also has just one arm, which sort of foreshadows what happens to her other arm down the line, because it gets chopped off. Now Beatrix then follows Sophie. Sophie knows she's being tailed, and Tarantino just can't help himself as we see a shot of her open-toed shoes. He's like Laris from House of the Dragons, that guy. Now it's at this point that we cut to the House of the Blue Leaves. We then hear the insanely cool song Battle Without Honor or Humanity as the gang arrive. The song was previously featured in the movie New Battles Without Honor and Humanity, and it starred the composer Tomiyasu Hotai, which nailing the pronunciation there. Whenever I think about this movie though, I just imagine them walking down in slow motion to this song. The long take and stuff they do here, it reminds me a lot of Goodfellas, namely the one restaurant scene that we have in that. Continuing on with the music, we have the 5, 6, 7, 8 song I'm Blue. The band actually appear in the movie as well, which is a really good inclusion. They also play their song Woohoo, which you couldn't escape on the radio around the time of the movie's release. Performing barefoot, I think this Tarantino guy might have something that he likes about feet. I did get sort of Star Wars vibes here though, with Oren almost sensing the bride and throwing a knife outside. It's like Vader sensing Obi-Wan on the Death Star, and it makes for such a great scene where Beatrix Spider-Mans herself on the ceiling. Getting an overhead one-shot take, this again feels reminiscent of Goodfellas, and it highlights Tarantino's skill as a director. Going with her, then back into the main hall, following Sophie, this is a masterclass of direction and camera work. While this is going on, we also see the restaurant owner talking about what happened with Tanaka. They basically say they need to give in to any of the Crazy 88's crazy demands, and it always makes me laugh how he's dressed a bit like Charlie Brown.
Charlie Brown.
Charlie Brown.
Now IMDb trivia pointed out a nice little connection here to Lost in Translation. Both feature Americans in Japan and have a character called Charlie Brown. That was directed by Sofia Coppola, and her and Tarantino dated at the time. Shortly after, Oren's called out by name and we see just Beatrix's mouth. It's very, very similar to how Mia Wallace spoke to Vincent via microphone when he arrived at her house.
Vincent.
As Beatrix steps over the glass floor, you can also pause the scene and spot something on her shoes. Yep, got a big FU spelled out on both soles, and it's such a cool inclusion for what's a very, very short shot. Slicing through the first guy's sword, we then see Beatrix wipe out the Crazy 88s with ease. Even just things like her slicing them and tapping her sword before they all fall over, it's absolutely fantastic. Feels like you can really see Tarantino just consumed hundreds of films and then brought them all together perfectly here. Laying them out easily, she then faces Gogo with her ball and a chain, which still looks brilliant. The bride doesn't want to kill her as she's just a kid, and she even gives her the chance to walk away. She uses the ball to strangle Beatrix though, which is also similar to a scene in Dario Argento's Deep Red. The ball itself is akin to a Chinese meteor hammer, and it's also similar to a rope and dart. Jackie Chan used a horseshoe and rope to make something similar in Shanghai Noon, and even swung around his neck similar to how Gogo does here. However, the bride gets the best of her. She uses a table leg and nails her. The final shot of Gogo dead with bloodied eyes is something that's lived rent-free in my head ever since. This shot is similar to one in 1980's City of the Living Dead, and it's a great way to end the character. What you might also notice is that as she lays on the ground, her night tick remains white because the blood only soaked into the fabric. Oren asks if she thought it would be that easy, and the bride's then swarmed by the rest of the 88. Throughout, you'll constantly see her staring at her blade, and this is in order to see who's sneaking up behind her. This is visually similar to a very cool scene in Fist of Fury where Bruce Lee fights an entire martial arts school. As mentioned previously, the movie switches to black and white here, and this is due to the sheer amount of blood used in the scene. It's a brutal set piece, complete with axe throws and beheadings, and in one particularly gruesome part, we see a person split in half, which is just like Ichi the Killer. I did wonder if Oren's surname Ishi was also a nod to that movie, though the spellings are different. So it's probably a reach, but moving on. Now due to YouTube, bloody YouTube, we can't show a person getting split in half, so Just like imagine it or something. Imagine all these scenes is, oh, it's really gory, that bit. Whoa, what's going on here? It's crazy. They also start to include some wire work and it becomes like a crouching tiger, hidden dragon. That film really pushed its use to the forefront in the West, but it has to be said, you know, it was used in the genre throughout. It's more of a fanciful and elegant kind of fight with characters flying around as opposed to the realistic Bruce Lee movies that we'd seen up until then. Speaking of Lee, we then see the bride spin on the floor and take out the gang's legs. Shoutouts to Olympus Man or Reddit for pointing out that this is a nod to when Lee did something similar in Fists of Fury. We then hear Nobody by the Human Beings play and the lights cut out, which is a very neat touch as her eyes close and we switch to a blue light with shadows. This itself's a reference to Samurai Fiction's opening scene where we see two silhouettes dueling in front of a red light. Now, this scene was performed by stuntwoman Zoe Bell and shot in silhouette due to the difficulty of the moves. Thurman was unable to pull them off and thus they had Bell do it and hit her face with the shadows. The fight then ends with her spanking one of the 88.
Go home to your mother!
This was a nod to Yojimbo when the protagonist tells the character to go home to his mother, ending with an 88 going into a pool of water. This feels like a nod to the end of Scarface. The bride then tells them to leave their limbs as they now belong to her. This gets further explained in part 2 as Pyme refuses to let go of her arm as he says it belongs to him now. The scene then leads into what's a beautiful snow fight duel. This moment is heavily lifted from the movie Lady Snowblood, with Oren wearing a similar outfit for the snow-covered duel here. She mentions that the fight may not last 5 minutes, and from the time it starts to the final strike, it's 4 minutes 59, which is such a cool detail. We then see Beatrix get sliced on the back, which reminded me a bit of the anime One Piece. There the character Zoro says how a wound on the back's the shame of a swordsman. As Oren's defeated, we see a Shishi or Doshi that thumbs when it's full of water. This is intended to scare deer away, but it's also a little Easter egg. This is a nod to the Seven Samurai, which features the repeated thump of a watermill. Oren then apologizes for insulting her earlier. She talks about a Caucasian playing samurai, which mirrors her own insecurities about her heritage. Now, Tarantino was going to have Beatrix cut her head off, but he decided against it as then she wouldn't realize that the sword was indeed a Hanzo original. Oren's name's then crossed out, and as mentioned earlier, the bride then goes on to kill Green. However, Fatale is left at the hospital as she is enlisted as being on the revenge list. Sophia is then interrogated in an iconic trunk shot as Bill then speaks to Sophie about her betrayal. She's kept alive simply to be a messenger, which is normally an act of mercy carried out in revenge stories. She also gives up the names of the deadly vipers, and Beatrix writes the list, which is just like the movie The Mercenary. We then see Bud saying that she deserves her revenge, and it sets up Volume 2 really nicely. Now, according to IMDb trivia, Bud was actually named after one of Tarantino's favourite directors, Bud Bodeka. Bell then warns him that Beatrix is on her way. Not going to warn Vinita then, mate? Elle also says she must suffer to her last breath as we see her look from part 2. This design was inspired by a cruel picture, which has a young girl getting revenge on a man who abused her. The bride then asks how Bill found her in a flashback, to which he says he's the man. Now at this point, only her eyes and earrings are in colour. The green earrings may be a callback to Bill's green ring that we saw around the 23-28 mark, and we also saw a blue shirt under his jacket. The scene with Sophie is also shot with a bluish hue, which might be his trademark colour. We close out the film asking whether she's aware her daughter's alive, and that sets up part 2 perfectly. After doing a deep dive on the first part, I thought we'd continue our quest for revenge with the bride. This video will contain Easter eggs, hidden details, and all the making of trivia you guys want to know. Now, as we explained last time, Volume 1 and 2 were supposed to be one film. However, due to the runtime, they ended up releasing it in 2 parts. There were some discrepancies over this though, namely on the film's early posters. Last movie began by saying the 4th film by Quentin Tarantino, so naturally, you'd assume this was the 5th. That was even printed on the early posters. However, this should really just be seen as one movie. Because of this, the following posters just said a new film, and then Death Proof was classed as number 5. Even after we get the title, it just says a film by Quentin Tarantino. So it's clear that the director looks at it like its own thing. We don't even get our feature presentation banner, and instead we just dive right into the logos. Now, though this is technically a sequel, Tarantino doesn't really like to do them. Volume 2's technically the only sequel he's ever directed, but I actually think there's certain things that set it apart. Tarantino made the first to be a play on the kung fu genre, whereas here this is more of a western. That's seen right from the off, which even has a western score over the logos. Presented in black and white, this riffs off the original opening and we find ourselves back at the church. The scene plays out pretty much the same, except this time we have a western themed score.
This is me at my most masochistic. This is me at my most masochistic.
I always kind of took this as it being how Bill views himself, with him being akin to a character from a western. The bride sees herself more like a kung fu hero, and that's why the scene plays a different way. Speaking of scores, the making have said that Robert Rodriguez scored this film for the very low price of $1. Obviously he's friends with Tarantino, so he rolled in the mates rates. As a thank you, Tarantino then directed a scene in Sin City for the same price, which was the moment where Dwight drives about with Jackie Boy. Speaking of driving, we then cut to a scene of the bride riding in her car. Now, I'm sure everyone watching this is aware of what happened, but just in case you're not, there was a lot of controversy around an accident on set involving it later in the movie. Footage of this is out online, but it was kept away from the public for years. Now, it all went down back in 2002 when Thurman was filming a scene that required her to drive down a dirt track. Even though she'd requested a stunt woman, this was denied due to issues on the day. The scene wasn't considered a stunt, and thus a stunt coordinator wasn't present on set. So Tarantino persuaded her to shoot it, but she lost control of the car. In what looks like a pretty hard crash, she was left with a concussion and 2 badly injured knees. Thurman tried to gain access to the footage, but Harvey Weinstein initially refused. He did eventually say that he'd give her it though, purely on the proviso she signed a document that released Miramax from liability. Because of this, her working relationship with Tarantino was greatly affected, though this was all kept under wraps. Years later, we had the big Me Too movement where Thurman was asked about it.
I think it's commendable. I don't have a tidy soundbite for you, and I have learned that when I've spoken in anger, I usually regret the way I express myself. So I've been waiting to feel less angry. And when I'm ready, I'll say what I have to say.
After this, Tarantino gave her the footage and supported her coming forward with allegations against Weinstein. It turns out that Weinstein had tried the same thing on Quentin's girlfriend at the time, and that she'd confided in him. Uma then backed up the claim and said he'd done the same thing, which is when Tarantino realized it was a pattern of behavior. He and Thurman then finally reconciled, but Quentin's admitted it's his biggest regret. Footage of the scene is still left in the film though, but obviously they cut it just before the crash. But yeah, seeing it open up like this, it's difficult not to cast your mind to it. Now after the title, we then go to chapter 6, showcasing the massacre at Two Pines. This chapter was actually reworked a lot throughout filming. If you watched our last breakdown, then you'll know that originally Gogo's sister Yuki was going to feature in the movie. She'd be stalking the bride in an ice cream van, which we saw outside Vanita Green's house in Volume 1. The title, Yuki's Revenge, would then open this movie, and we'd see her ambush the bride. She'd then destroy the pussy wagon, which is why the bride has to change cars. Here though, they don't really explain it, and she just says it died on her.
My pussy wagon died on me.
However, this was all cut, but we do retain the consequences of the scene. Instead though, we open up with this chapter, which was initially titled Can She Bake a Cherry Pie? Set to feature Samuel L. Jackson's wife Latanya Richardson, we join Bill at a casino. Bill would end up killing the character, and from here we then cut to the bride. I do like the way the movie starts though, and it picks up at the wedding.
In actual fact, the massacre didn't happen during a wedding at all. It was a wedding rehearsal.
Oh, I think I even called it a wedding in our Volume 1 breakdown, so sorry for that, yeah? And as of writing this, we haven't actually released our Volume 1 breakdown, so if people are correcting me, then I'm sorry. I could change it before releasing it, but this bit would also have to go as well, and I'm saying it to you, and thus I don't want to create a weird time paradox, so we're leaving it in. Anyway, we open with the clergy running through the proceedings. The priest is played by Bo Svensson, who was in the original Inglourious Bastards. What would have built off Bill at the casino then takes us to Samuel L. Jackson. Now this sort of goes into theory time, theory time, theory time. So there is a theory around the movie that his characters actually duels from Pulp Fiction. This is due to the line,
I was a drill, I was a drifter, I was a coaster.
If you cast your mind back to Pulp Fiction, then you might remember Jules says this.
First,
I'm gonna deliver this case to Marcellus. Then, basically, I'm just gonna walk the earth.
Because of this, it's believed Jules became a drifter and then ended up at this church. In Pulp Fiction, it's also played up as a moment of divine intervention in which Jules has witnessed a miracle. So it makes sense he'd end up here. Now, Rufus also says that he played for Rufus Thomas.
Rufus? Who was that you used to play for?
Rufus Thomas.
Rufus Thomas is a legendary musician, and it's possible Jules adopted his name. Just strange having the two called Rufus, and thus it's been thought to be a moniker. However, people have shot this down because it's possible that things he mentioned were bands.
I was a drill, I was a drifter, I was a coaster.
The Drells, Drifters, and Coasters, they were all bands, and he's likely implying he played backup while they toured. So it's more likely that, but a part of my theory time likes to think it was Jules. Anyway, that's in a theory. I'll not bother doing the thing. Now, they make it clear that the bride doesn't have anyone on her side. The church member says she should have at least one family member as a sign of good faith, which drives the bride to want to go and get some air. Stepping out, we then get a continuation of the scene from Volume 1 where she sees Bill. However, this retains the black and white, whereas there it had segments of colour. It gives it this old-timely feel though, and fits well with being a memory. As she stands there on the porch, you might also notice a sign that says Agua Caliente. This is a reference to the town that sees the showdown in for a few dollars more. Now, you really get a connection between the two, but we never really see their exploits together. However, there was a big deleted scene with Michael J. White where we'd see them in the past.
Gentlemen, can I help you?
You bastard. The only thing you can do for me is die. You kill my master Darmo.
It's really camping over the top, and yeah, with him going for a more western style, I can't see why it was cut. Seeing she's pregnant, Bill then says her man doesn't waste any time. As we know though, it's Bill's kid, so it makes his judgment a little false. Initially though, he seems like he's there to support her, and Bill pretends to be her father. Going under the name Arlene, Bill says he's never heard of a wedding rehearsal before. Her would-be husband then explains they paid a lot of money for the dress, and it seems stupid to just wear it once, so they figured they might as well get their money's worth. However, this was another aspect that would have paid off later on. In earlier drafts of the script, the bride would wear her dress at the end and she and Bill would have a big fight. This would be an elaborate swashbuckling sword fight that would go down on a beach. This in itself would also build off of part 1. However, as production ran on, the budget was getting low, and this Bloody Harvey Weinstein said they had to cut it. So instead, we just get a reference to it when Bill says this.
I suppose the idea is we cross Hanzo swords. Am I right? Then we could wait until dawn and slice each other up.
Now here they just play it as being bad luck to see your wife in her wedding dress before the big day, and yeah, turns out to be unlucky. We also learn that the groom is called Tommy Plimpton, which Tarantino named after animator Bill Plimpton, who he's apparently a big fan of. After seemingly giving his blessing, we then pull out a long unbroken take to show the Deadly Viper assassination squad entering the church. This builds off the back of part 1 in which we had the long unbroken take at the restaurant. We will talk about this scene further in the breakdown, but after this we then cut across to Bud. Warned that Beatrix is coming by Bill, we get a cool detail with his car. This is a De Thomas Mangusta. Mangusta means mongoose in Italian, with mongooses having a reputation for killing snakes. Bill's codename the Snake Charmer and the Deadly Viper Assassination Squad all have snake-themed names. So it's a nice little touch, but even gets killed by a snake, with this being a Black Mamba. Black Mamba was the bride's codename, so even though she didn't get her revenge directly, a Black Mamba killed Bud in the end. However, we see Bud's now stepped away from the life, and he says he even pawned off his Atari Hanzo's sword. Later on though, we see that he kept it, as it was a gift from his brother. Anyway, turns out the guy's now a bouncer, and we see that as we go to chapter 7. Titled The Lonely Grave of Paula Schultz, this is a grave Beatrix later gets buried in. However, it has a bigger connection to the Tarantino world. Paula is thought to be either a relation or the wife of Dr. King Schultz from Django Unchained. That movie was set in 1858, and judging by the dates on the grave, she lived around that time. The name is also likely a nod to the 1968 film The Wicked Dreams of Paula Schultz, which again is just Tarantino flexing his love for film. Inside the bar, we also meet Bud's boss Larry Bishop. His character name's Larry, and he actually starred alongside David Carradine in 1972's Kung Fu. Larry lambasts him, and back in the bar he gets told he's gotta clean up the poop in the toilet. It's a big fall from grace, and kinda reminds me of westerns like Unforgiven. We then see as he returns home, and he looks about before entering his trailer. The bride's revealed to be lying low under it, and sort of working like a ninja assassin. Now upon going in, we hear him play A Satisfied Mind by Johnny Cash. Huge shoutouts to Mercer the Cat on Reddit, who pointed out a brilliant detail. The song was written by Jack Rhodes and Joe Hayes, with the latter explaining its meaning. He said his father-in-law asked him one day who the richest man in the world was, and Hayes then listed off a number of names. His father-in-law then explained he was wrong, and said it was the man with a satisfied mind. This is clearly the opposite to how Bud feels due to the way his life's turned out. He's racked with guilt over what he did to Beatrix, and is now living in a squalor. He feels like he's been used by everyone, and that he's constantly held back by the bosses in his life. Whether that's Bill or Larry, no one allows him to succeed. However, in the end, he makes a choice for himself, which comes in burying Beatrix. Though he could kill her, he tries to get the money on his own terms, which he hopes will give him a satisfied mind. Now, Madsen, of course, worked with Tarantino before on Reservoir Dogs. Though I'm not going to go into a big theory time on how he's Mr. Blonde, there are little nods to his character. Firstly, as Bud shoots Beatrix back, we can spot a can of gasoline in the corner. Jumping back to Reservoir Dogs, this is the same one Blonde poured out on the policeman. When she's in the coffin, Beatrix also pulls out a razor blade from a boot. These boots just so happen to be the same ones that Madsen wore in the film. On top of that, he also pulled out a blade to cut off the officer's ear. So it's all tying in with that, and Bud then injects her with a serum that causes her to become paralyzed. Looking at how this compares with the first film, there's also a lot of similarities. There, the bride was shot at the start, and she was then confined to a hospital. Lying in bed, she was comatose for 4 years, becoming sort of trapped in her body. Bedbound and unable to move, she eventually woke up and fought her way out of it. Here, the bride's been shot again and made to lie down, unable to move. Moments from it are even in black and white, which definitely makes it feel like it builds off that beginning. Now, it's only after fighting her way out that she's able to escape, and it's sort of like poetry they rhyme. Now, after paralyzing her, we see as Bud sits down and rings hell. We see as he puts down a tin of Oak Ridge coffee, which he's been using as a spit can. Tarantino pulls this from his own life, as Oak Ridge was a town near Knoxville, which is where he grew up. Bud also says,
I just caught me the cowgirl. Ain't never been caught.
Shoutouts to IMDb Trivia for pointing out this comes from The Driver, where we get the line, I'm gonna catch the cowboy that's never been caught. Bud then tries to sell Alejandro's sword for $1 million, and they then make a deal.
And I'll give you the greatest sword ever made by a man.
Ellen says she wants Beatrix to suffer until her last breath, which then takes us to the graveyard. I love how Tarantino has the aspect ratio as 4:3, and it creates a box around the bride. It helps to add to the feeling of claustrophobia, and it's such a great touch. As we see Paula's grave being dug up, you can also catch her body in the coffin. On the wall of it, her fingers create little rabbit ears, which could be a nod to the bride's nickname.
Silly rabbit. Tricks are for kids.
Another detail I love that was pointed out in the commentary was that the bride never actually speaks to Bud. The only communication she does is through nodding, and she points towards wanting the flashlight. Bud then gives her a chance, at least, and though being buried alive, the odds aren't that good, it is at least a chance. Bud just sees her as breaking his brother's heart, and thus we then go from a wedding to a funeral. The scene's so messed up though, and it's easily the first thing I think about when I think about this movie. I've even seen Facebook videos explaining how to escape being buried alive, and they treat this as the way to get out. Not sure if it's gonna work, but if you've escaped, let me know. Now, she does this by using the 3-inch punch, and we discover where she learned this from. This then takes us to chapter 8, which centers around Pai Mei. We begin the chapter around the campfire with Bill telling his story. However, originally they were going to have Bill driving Beatrix out of the temple, but they felt that this was more intimate. This flute is also like the one he had at the wedding rehearsal, and it comes from the Circle of Iron. This 1978 film was written by Bruce Lee, and it starred Carradine in the lead role. Now, the story's called The Massacre of the Shaolin Temple, and we learn there was 60 monks inside. The way the opening chapter is titled Massacre, and Beatrix basically kills as many people as she can, I did think the stories were intertwined. Whether that's the case or not, what it does is set up Pai Mei as a badass, and we learn of his 5-point palm exploding heart technique. This originally was a 10-point punishment, but they changed it to 5 when filming. I did wonder if this was to line up better with the 5 targets, but unfortunately I couldn't find anything about it. However, Bill also says,
if you flash him, even for an instant, a defiant eye, he'll pluck it out.
As we learn, Elle lost her eye because of Pai Mei, so this is a great bit of foreshadowing. The next day we see Pai Mei will accept her, and you can tell he and Bill have just had a friendly contest, as Bill calls it. Going up the gigantic stairs, we then go to the tomb of the last emperor of China. Now this is where we kind of go back to the martial arts influence that's been missing throughout the first half. Pai Mei's clearly a caricature, with him being very much the elderly kung fu master. Based on Bak Mei, this is the man who is known as the White Eyebrow. Bak Mei was said to be one of the 5 elders who survived the destruction of the Shaolin monasteries. However, he later betrayed the others to save himself. Due to this, his teachings are considered forbidden, and he's seen as a villain in the folklore. They nail the feel of a classic film with him though, even down to the zoom-ins and zoom-outs. One touch I love that takes me back to the old days, it also comes down to the dubbing. Now Tarantino originally wanted Pai Mei to speak Cantonese on set that they'd then dub with English. Tarantino even considered providing the voice, but they went with the actors instead. That is Chia Hu Lu, who also starred in several kung fu classics. Originally though, they wanted the film's choreographer Yen Wu Ping. Due to his work on the film though, he didn't have time to balance both jobs. Now speaking of balance, we see as Pai Mei balances on a sword. They use lots of wirework techniques, and I love how much this plays off the techniques used in the Eastern film industry. They have the sword flying back into the holder, which was done by pulling it out and then reversing the shot. Overall, it's a great way to introduce the character, and he trains her to be the best of the best of the best, sir. We also see as he grabs her arm and bends around her back. The character then says it now belongs to him. Later on we see as the bride rips out Elle's other eye using this hand. As we learn, Elle killed Pai Mei, and due to him owning this arm, it could be seen as his revenge. He of course has a penchant for plucking out eyes, and I love this great little detail. The next day, the training begins for real, and we see Pai Mei punch through a wooden plank. This creates a perfectly round hole instead of the wood just splitting in half. According to IMDb trivia, this is a nod to Masusastu Oyama. I think I got it. I think I nailed it there. The legend is that he punched through an oak door and grabbed a burglar's wrist from the other side. This created a perfect circle, and thus they brought the story into the film. Now it's in this the bride learns of the 3-inch punch, which is also based off the teachings of Bruce Lee. Lee had developed a 1-inch punch knockout in which he'd channel all the energy into his body. He'd then position his leg and stand straight, and then use it to smash the like button. Did you know as well that members of the channel, they also get early access to videos every week? For just 99 cents a month, you'll get to see our breakdowns like this before anybody else, and it all helps to make these great breakdowns. Now we also see as Beatrix carries buckets of water, trains against rear projected backgrounds, and spars in silhouette just like she did in the first film. There it was used to cover up stunt woman Zoe Bell pulling off the moves, and even though I couldn't confirm whether that's the case here, I can imagine they might have done it for a similar reason. Or maybe not, and it's just because it looks cool. We then go back to the present and see as the bride digs her way out the grave. A hand pops up and she then climbs out, having survived one of the most terrifying things that could happen to you. I don't know if this was a nod to Carrie or even the cover of Craven's Last Hunt, but yeah, it's such an iconic moment. Strutting to a diner and getting a glass of water, we then get the chapter Elle and I. Now, you know I love a good pun, and I did wonder if the eye here was a play on, well, her just having one eye, and her eye getting pulled out. Going to bed, we then see the scene replayed from the bride's point of view moments later. Inside we see Bud wearing a shirt that says Quality Store, and I did wonder if this was his second job. The name does say Charlie though, so yeah, maybe that's a fashion out in Texas. Maybe it's an alias, look, I don't know mate, but moving on, we see how this is a trick by Elle, and along with the money, the suitcase contains a snake. According to IMDb trivia, this is a nod to 1981's Venom, which had Susan George opening a crate with a black mamba. This then bit her in the face, much like what happens with Bud. Funnily, Daryl Hannah actually ended up voicing a black mamba documentary in 2013, and she gave similar facts to what she does here.
Its neurotoxic venom is one of nature's most effective poisons. acting on the nervous system causing paralysis.
So this probably got her the job, but then dies on the floor paralyzed, and it's poetic justice for the position he's just put the bride in. Bud's trailer is also a coffin-shaped box, which I might be reaching there, but you can see how it kind of mirrors it. Elle then tells Bill Bud was killed by the bride, and it becomes clear why she chose the Black Mamba to do it. It's delivered to the audience during a flashback classroom scene, with this name also being called out.
Marty Catroser? Here.
This is a nod to Martin Catrosa, who's a script supervisor that worked on the film. We then see as Elle goes to leave, and I actually paused the movie by accident just as she was doing it. I get a bit trigger happy trying to write stuff and still follow the film, so sometimes you pause it and you get some funny stuff. Here it was the bride basically drop kicking her and being almost completely horizontal in the doorway. This then leads to a fight between the pair, in which we get some split screen shots. In our Volume 1 video, we talked about how they were referencing Brian De Palma, and it's obviously brought over from that. Showing the contents of Bud spit in Elle's face. When the bride was paralysed, he also spat in her face, which got all the tobacco stuff on it. So it's like kind of showing how mirrored the characters are, and they pretty much have the exact same moves. It's such a good fight in which they really make the most of the environment, including an in-toilet bowl shot. Beatrix eventually finds Bud's sword, and Elle tells her she killed Pai Mei. This was done with a poisonous fish, which plays into her MO. Not only did she poison Bud, but she also nearly killed Beatrix in part 1 by poisoning her at the hospital. Now apparently, Hannah and Thurman didn't get on well on set. This even spilled over into the press tour, where they requested being separated from each other. They even had their own areas at cans made, so they wouldn't be near each other at the after show party. From what I can gather, and I've done lots of deep digging, Hannah was basically jealous of Thurman, and she even killed her old master. Now I'm kidding there, but it adds to the tension when watching the scene. Beatrix also says,
"You don't have a future,"
which is a nod to a line that comes from Red Sonja.
I know my future. You have none.
That's also a movie about a woman getting revenge, so it fits in well with this film. Plucking out her eye, we then see as Elle frantically rolls around on the floor. This is a nod to Pris's death scene in Blade Runner, which also starred Daryl Hannah as the character. Now, there have been theories that Elle could still be alive, but I do think it's kind of doubtful. As the bride steps out, the Black Mamba hisses, and that's still in the trailer. Plus, she has a walk in the desert, so I can't really see her surviving. However, her fate's left unknown, and in the credits, there's a clue she's still around. All the actors who played dead characters get their names crossed out, whereas Hannah's just has a question mark. And watching the credits, I also had a question about what they do with Bill, and it's possible he could still be alive too. We'll talk about that later on in the breakdown, but there's another play on the eye pull. The film ends with an outtake, and this has the bride in Volume 1 ripping out an eyeball. However, I feel like the change might be due to her actions in Volume 1. Elle was called off from injecting her and spared her, and it could be a flip on that due to both characters being helpless. Might not be because she was obviously concussed and didn't know about it, but they did change the script to have Elle left alive. Either way, we then go to the last chapter face to face. This contains the crash scene, and yet I did wonder if the angry expression when we cut to the front was in the aftermath of them shooting that scene. Either way, we meet Esteban Vigeo, who's played by Michael Parks. Parks has starred in lots of Tarantino films, including From Dusk Till Dawn. He also played the sheriff in part 1, and yeah, you probably wouldn't think it was the same actor. On the table, you might also notice a box of Red Apple cigarettes. This is the fictional brand of cigarettes from Tarantino's films that were also advertised in Volume 1. Beatrix also mentions
his army, the Acuna Boys.
Now this was a gang in Rolling Thunder, which Tarantino said is one of his favourite films. That film involves 5 killers who murder a man's wife and child, and he then sets out on a quest for revenge. So you can see how it inspired this. He's also reading the book, The Caracoons of Courageux. This is a fictional book by Jasmine Yun, who was one of the crew members. This book comes full circle in Django Unchained, as Django comes from the Caracan plantation. Now Esteban's been like a father to Bill, and he talks about how he was as a child. He talks about how he used to act as a kid, and brings up a story about Bill sucking his thumb in the cinema. Now this apparently was inspired by a story Kurt Russell told Tarantino.
And whenever she would appear on the screen, Bill began compulsively to suck his thumb to an obscene amount.
Kurt said he did it for Marilyn Monroe, and Esteban says this.
And I knew from this very moment this boy was a fool for bronze.
Kurt of course ended up with Goldie Hawn, so yeah, nice little bit of Kurt Russell trivia for you there. As for Bill, he ended up with Beatrix before going on to Elle. One really messed up detail is that Esteban's a pimp, and he says Beatrix would have been his #1 lady. He talks about how Bill shot her in the head, whereas he would have just cut her face. I don't think we can show it, but we then see a girl who works for him, who's got both her lips split, which was clearly done by the character. Sort of speaks to Bill's upbringing, and basically just lays out why he's the way he is. He then tells Beatrix,
on the road to Selena.
This is a nod to the film The Road to Selena from 1970. A piece of the score from that film is also played in this movie when Beatrix approaches Bud's trailer. Heading out to Bill, we then see that his room number's 101. This could possibly be a nod to 1984, where room 101 was a torture chamber in the Ministry of Love. In this, people were taunted by either a phobia or fear, and that would then be used to break them down. Inside, Beatrix discovers her daughter's still alive and that she's been raised by Bill. Named BB, this is a combination of Beatrix and Bill. The worst thing is that both play it like happy families. Neither BB or Bill act like she's been on a quest for revenge. It's basically the perfect life she would have had with Bill, but Bill turned her into a killer. Beatrix ran away because she worried her daughter would become that too, and it definitely feels Bill's laying the groundwork. The first time we see her, she's pointing a toy gun, and she constantly says, "Bang bang!" The pair then both pretend to be shot down by her as well.
Hold down, sweetheart. They shot us.
If you cast your mind back to the first film, you might also remember that we had the song Bang Bang, My Baby Shot Me Down, which is pretty much happening in this moment. You could even see BB as standing for Bang Bang, so it's a great little Easter egg. Again, if you pointed that out on our first breakdown, apologies for not crediting you, but this was made before we released that one, so sorry. Now, the bride is clearly conflicted over what to do, but she plays along in the end. I think she's just overcome with everything, but doesn't want to destroy her daughter's first impression. Bill even told her that she's been asleep since she was born, and he plays it like he's been doing the right thing. Guy's an absolute nutcase, and yet it puts Beatrix in a really difficult position. BB's a kid who's just learned about life and death, and we discover this came when she stepped on her goldfish. So there is that side to her that she's now growing up, but Bill's still cutting the crusts off her sandwiches. It's a really complex ending that I don't really think I fully understood when I was growing up. Not the goldfish thing. Like, the sincerity and the emotion in it, you know, it's something that you get more as an adult. To me, I just wanted action for the finale, but you could argue this is way more impactful. Bill actually shows remorse for shooting Beatrix, and it seems like he wants to patch it back together. To me, it's always seemed like a deal with the devil though, and him basically giving her everything she wants. However, we know there'd be a catch, and that Bill wouldn't really let her or BB break free from his control. However, Beatrix does get a taste of happiness, and together she and BB watch Shogun Assassin. According to the Kill Bill diary by David Carradine, they were originally going to watch the Aristocats. However, Disney denied the request, so they watched Shogun Assassin instead. Shogun Assassin is based on the Lone Wolf and Cub story, which in the end you could see as being about BB and Beatrix. However, in the story the pair kill their way across Japan, so potentially it's actually about BB and Bill here. Clearly she's watched it before with him, and thus this may be why it was chosen. Putting her down to bed by About Her by Malcolm McLaren, we see Beatrix and Bill sit down to talk. You might notice that on the TV there's a western playing, with the punch lining up perfectly with a clank as Bill puts down the sword. He also says,
"If you don't settle down, I'm gonna have to put one in your kneecap. And I hear tell that's a very painful place to get shot in."
This is a nod to Reservoir Dogs, where Mr. White said the gut was the most painful place for a man to be shot, other than the kneecap. So it is possible that White even told Bill about this. You also get a direct nod to Shane when Bill puts his gun back in the holster. This was a TV show in the 60s that starred Carradine as the titular character. Bill then shoots her up with a trank that has a toxin called the Undisputed Truth. The first film was going to have Bill revealed to dabble in chemicals and have made several drugs. Al was then going to go inject the bride with one of these as she was comatose, but instead they just left it as this. The Undisputed Truth though, that is a reference to the band from the 70s. They were known for their song Smiling faces, come on, smiling faces, tell her, you know the one. That's obviously a song about liars who put on a friendly facade, which you can definitely apply to Bill. Bill then rattles off a big monologue, and he talks about Superman and Clark Kent. Bringing up how Peter Parker wakes up and is Peter Parker, he talks about how he puts on a costume to then become Spider-Man. However, on the flip side of that, Superman is the true face who wears Clark Kent as a costume. He sums this up by saying that Beatrix is who she really is, and that if she got married, she'd be wearing the costume of Arlene. Both Carradine and Tarantino were massive comic book collectors, and Tarantino used his knowledge to craft this major talking point. Since then, it's been heavily debated, and still today is something people discuss about the character. Bill also mentions
Bruce Wayne,
with Thurman starring in the unforgettable ice pun extravaganza that was Batman and Robin. On top of this, Bill also says she's a natural born killer.
Natural born killer.
Tarantino wrote the script for that movie, and it's a nice little line. We also get a cut where the bride takes a pregnancy test and then stares at a watch. According to IMDb trivia, this is a fake Rolex, which you can apparently see by the markings, but got no idea if that's true because I'm not a watch expert. Anyway, we then see how this leads into a showdown with an assassin who's sent by Lisa Wong. Pleading with her that she's pregnant, the assassin decides to spare her. It's sort of a reverse on the moment in part 1 where Venita's daughter arrived at the house. Beatrix refused to fight in front of her, and I feel like there might have been a part of Beatrix that might have spared Venita. I know they arranged the fight and they did start talking, but I think in the end she might have let her live. Obviously though, Venita tried to go kaboom on her, and yeah, in the end the bride acted in self-defense. However, what this highlights is how pregnancy changed Beatrix's priorities, and instead of Bill being number 1, BB was instead. Bill then admits that he overreacted, but he's a murderer, so the reaction wasn't that surprising. It's a great conversation, and is arguably the most human part in both movies. Ending in a chair sword fight that leads to the palm technique, we then see as Bill takes his last steps. It's like, I don't know, it's like a classic Western death scene. This song's called The Confrontation, and it's by Ennio Morricone. It comes from the movie Navajo Joe, which was a western about a man whose tribe was massacred along with his wife, and thus he set out on a quest for revenge. I think it's Navajo Joe, or it might be Navajo Joe, but you can see how this fits in with the film, and we also have Bill buttoning up his jacket. If you cast your mind back to earlier in the movie, you might remember he unbuttoned his jacket at the wedding rehearsal. So these two moments are mirrored perfectly. Bill even stands on the opposite side of the frame, and whereas the bride walked away there, Bill does here. Both led to the characters seemingly dying, and I say seemingly as there's a chance Bill's still alive. As mentioned earlier, the actors whose characters died get their names crossed out in the credits. However, Carradine's doesn't have that, and it's caused a lot of theories online. The most evidence I've seen put towards this was actually compiled by Jordan Lunn, who posted it on Reddit. Now it all comes from what we see, or rather don't see in the film. In the movie we see Pai Mei teach her the eye pluck trick along with a 3-inch punch. However, we never see the palm technique, and the bride even says this when asked about it.
Pai Mei taught you the 5-point palm exploding heart technique.
Of course he did.
Now though Beatrix says he did, the way she shakes her head, it's more like a no. In psychology, this can denote someone's lying as they subconsciously move their head to tell the truth. Now, when we view the two films chronologically, there's actually an interesting arc that Beatrix goes on. Technically, the first person she kills is Ren, but that happens at the end of Volume 1. Beatrix then goes after Venita, but upon seeing her daughter, she puts away her blade. She's clearly trying to shield a child, and might even question why she's doing this. The bride then kills Venita in self-defense, but this is the last person she actually kills in the timeline, but is then killed by Elle, and Elle's left alive. The bride then goes to Bill, and Bill play-acts being killed by her. We then have the flashback scene where she learns that she's pregnant, and she goes from being a killer to being a mother. In Volume 1, she woke up at the hospital and felt her stomach and knew the baby was gone. In her mind, the child had been killed, and thus she went from a mother back to a killer. It's only upon coming across BB at Bill's that she finally switches back into mother mode. We then have her saying that she learned the technique, all while shaking her head to say that she didn't. Looking at Bill's walk, we can also see that he actually takes 6 steps. Upon standing up, he pivots on his foot and clearly rests on one side. He then takes the 5 steps forward before crashing into the ground. That is a point of contention, and people are like, well, it's 1 step, it doesn't technically count as 1, so blah 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 blah. However, what happens with Beatrix though is that she also hits him 6 times. So potentially this is either his acknowledgement that it was 6 and he's just playing along with the game. Now the next morning we then cut to BB watching a cartoon while Beatrix is crying in the bathroom. Lying in a similar position to how Bill collapsed, she then says this. Now, though she may be thanking God or a higher power, it could also be Bill. He's allowed her to go off and live with her daughter, and they're now keeping up the pretense that she got her revenge on him. We can also see that BB and Beatrix are watching Heckle and Jekyll, which is about 2 trickster crows, and potentially could symbolize the pair pulling off this trick. Bill will allow Beatrix to go and live with their daughter, and he'll pretend to be dead so it doesn't cause issues. We also end the film after the credits with the bride winking to the camera. There are several ways to take this, and it might even be her saying there's a little trick behind it all. Just one way to take it, but either way, I think the ending works really well, and the bride's finally able to go off and be with her daughter. The credits then have an extra shot where the pair ride off together smiling, and they're gonna go and have a happy life. Unless Nikki shows up, which might be happening. In terms of Kill Bill Volume 3, Tarantino said, "I've already put together the whole mythology. Sophia Fatale will get all of Bill's money. She'll raise Nikki, who'll take on the bride. Nikki deserves her revenge every bit as much as the bride deserved hers," which is a terrible impression, but we can take it that Bill's dead on some levels if that's what's going to be happening. But it's a fan theory I've always loved, so I definitely thought it was worth covering if we're going deep on the movie. Either way though, that concludes our journey through Kill Bill Volume 1 and 2. I really hope you guys have enjoyed it, and if you have, please hit the thumbs up, and also make sure you drop your thoughts on the film below. Now if you want something else to watch, we've got a breakdown of the first film, so if you haven't seen that, then head over there after this. I think that movie's an absolute classic, you know, I do rate it above this one, but both are so good back to back, and yeah, it's definitely worth checking out the breakdowns because there's so much stuff in them. If not though, thank you for sitting through this video. I've been your host Paul, you've been the best, and I'll see you next time. Take care, peace.